What makes the achievement of emotional sobriety so difficult is the habits we have, the patterns we have in our behavior, the habitual ways that we've come to think about things. We have to really become aware of those things in order to challenge them, because the consciousness that has created a lot of the problems in our life cannot solve it, cannot change things. So what happens is the first step is waking up. So today we begin our discussion of step 3. And once again, I always like to put into context that the steps are sequential and interdependent. What happens in step 1 prepares us for, creates a charge, gets us ready for what happens in steps 2. We talked about how step 1 started to deconstruct the consciousness that we had about how life was supposed to be, how we were supposed to be, and started to put a crack in that cosmic egg so that we could start to be open to a new possibility. See, we realized that the way that we were looking at things and the way we were trying to live our life really wasn't working. So we admitted we were powerless, which no person wants to do. It's not part of who we think we should be if we're going to be okay. But here we realize is that the ideas that we had may not be serving us well. And we begin to create the possibility of something different. And then the second half of that first step is that our lives have become unmanageable. It's a 1-2 punch. We say we're powerless, and then we go to our lives as unmanageable, which means that we've made a mess of things. And if I take responsibility for the existence I create, then I realize that I need to accept responsibility for the life I'm living. So as we do that, now we go into this existential crisis. I talked about that being the charge. My life is a mess. I don't know how to do this thing any different. I'm in trouble. I'm up the creek without a paddle, so to speak. And step 2 comes along and resolves that existential crisis. Step 2 essentially is saying that there is hope, right? There is hope, but we're going to have to do something very different in order to realize hope. We're going to have a new foundation to our lives. We're going to have to start to look at things, with an illuminated gaze, is the way that Father Richard Rohr talks about spirituality. Is we look at things in a very different way than we've been looking at things. And there's nothing like desperation and pain to get us to wake up, right? And to start seeing that we need some help and what's going to happen? How can I turn things around? And this idea that there's hope, that there is another possibility that we may know little of, becomes a very important thing. And that now creates a charge. There's hope. Well, what are we going to do? Well, step 3, I love how Bill calls this. This is the first step, that the first 2 steps are based on acceptance. And we talked about how important acceptance is in terms of self-esteem, true self-esteem. And this step is now taking action. We're now moving into an affirmative action, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Now, I love the emphasis that Herb has put on this. It's make a decision to turn. Make a decision to turn. Well, I want to focus on that. And look, Bill says very clearly that the key here is willingness, is having a willingness to be open to a new possibility, one that we might not even be able to imagine. So in some way, we're also opening the door for some curiosity, right? And Bill feels, the effectiveness of the whole program is going to rest upon how well and how earnestly we have tried to come to a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Now, before I go into what I want to talk about is what we're turning away from and what we're turning towards, I wanted to share with you something that happened to me today. As most of you know, 51 years ago, my journey in recovery started on the island of Oahu. That was my last duty station. I had just returned from Vietnam. I'm a combat Marine veteran of Vietnam. And it just so happened through a serendipity or synchronicity, however you may want to think about it, I ended up being the 3rd Marine treated in this new program to help Vietnam vets instead of just give us a general discharge or bad conduct discharge because we're using drugs and get rid of us. So they didn't know anything with the program, but they knew they didn't know, and they turned to the AA community. At that time, there was no Narcotics Anonymous on the island of Oahu, only AA meetings. They turned to the community outside the base, and there happened to be a group of young people. And some of you know my sponsor is Tom McCall, and he came out the base, and that was the first time I was really introduced to emotional freedom, right? I saw that this man was comfortable being who he was. He was free from the bondage of self. And that there was a part of me that said, my God, if somehow I could achieve something close to that in my life, I think I could make life work. And I went up to him, and he's still my sponsor today after 51 years. Well, one of the other Toms that was very close to us at that point was a fellow by the name of Tom Catton. And it was like Tom and Alan, and we just hung out together and we did everything together. And Tom was just an incredible man and had helped so many people in NA and following. I mean, just every day he would meditate, and he had such a rich spiritual life. Well, the last several years of his life, he developed dementia. And he's been declining in his health day by day, moment by moment, inch by inch. He's been dying. And today he passed, yesterday, I should say, he passed away. And I wanted to read to you guys something that his family wrote today that they posted on Facebook. And it was so touching to me. I thought, this is an example of what he turned towards and what happens to us when we turn towards the light. So this is his wife and his 2 children wrote this. My earthly and spiritual father has transitioned to the other side. I have been honored and privileged and humble as I sat by his bedside. B, Josh, caregivers, and other Ohana walked him through the dying process. We found ourselves in frequent tears of grief. We laughed and we celebrated his grand and profound existence. We held a 5-day vigil, and you left on 10/12/22 at 11:37. Dad, as your breathing changed, we found ourselves hypnotized and so focused on the breath, on your breath. It was beautiful. We played your singing bowls above your head. Josh strummed song after song on his guitar. We played Van Morrison, spiritual music, and we ohmed. We gave you rubs and hugs and whispered in your ear. We shared stories of your life and the impact you had on us. We all agreed that yours was an extraordinary one. You were colorful in the literal and figurative sense. Everyone you encountered loved your amazing outfits. You shamelessly invited people into your life and showered all humans with love. You employed the homeless. You had compassion for the suffering addicts and alcoholics. You went and worked with those addicts who were incarcerated. You went to any measure. Sometimes I struggled with having to share your love with so many, but now I see your gifts so clear. Spreading love so generously to all living things has been a beautiful example of life, of a life well lived. You taught me so much. The lessons weren't traditional in the parental sense, but more about handling life on life's terms. To seek a relationship with a power greater than myself, to serve others with love and compassion, and to have honesty and integrity in all that I do. Perhaps one of the great lessons I have learned is to find joy, adventure, and laughter in life. You've been a spiritual seeker and teacher, a friend and a father, a husband and son and brother, an incredible grandfather, a grateful recovering addict who devoted his life to helping those who struggled with addiction and wanted to do the hard work of staying clean. These are but a few of the most important life jobs I can think of here during this time on earth. You lived a lot of chapters. Many will recall your playful spirit. You became a marathon runner with competitive times, an avid biker, and ended up running some big businesses. You even ran 50 miles on your 50th birthday and then biked 70 miles on your 70th birthday. You loved milestones, and we had huge plans for 80 steps on your 80th birthday. You see, the dementia took you way too soon. We will do something grand for your would-be 80th in a couple of years, Dad. We love you. So many of our friends are connecting with you here. Thank you to all of our friends and family that have reached out to us. Well, that's what it looks like to live a life well lived. You know, the legacy that he's left behind just touches me to the core. He's a man that I just loved and cared about, and he shared his recovery with me freely and tirelessly in those early days in my life. So may you rest in peace, Tom. Well, what I thought I'd want to focus on today, being inspired by what Tom turned to, is to spend a little time about this step in how we are turning away from things and turning towards other things in our life. That's what is making a decision to turn. And the turn has two sides to it. It's turning away from and turning towards. And I just want to explore with you some of the musings I had today about what are we turning away from and what are we turning towards. Well, obviously, the first one that jumps out is we're turning away from a life that is being run by self-will. And we're turning towards living a life that's based on God's will, or if you will, based on a higher consciousness, a very different kind of consciousness than we've lived before. We're moving away from it's all about me. This is one of the things that causes us to take things so personally. We make everything about us, to a consciousness that recognizes I'm just not that important. We have a sense of humility that people do what they do because of who they are, not because of who we are. That now we're moving towards a low focus on ourselves. We're moving away from shoulds, supposed tos, absolutes. And we're moving towards more of an accepting ourselves as we are and others as they are. We're moving more towards accepting reality as it is, instead of imposing all of these demands on it. We're moving away from a life that was riddled with self-deceit. Before we gaslighted other people, we gaslit ourselves. That's the truth of it. And we're moving towards a life that's based on what we could call a radical, ruthless, and yet still compassionate honesty. We're moving away from dedicating ourselves to actualize a concept of who we should be of dedicating ourselves to actualize our idealized self, towards now trying to understand and embrace our true self, our actual self. We're moving away from impulsive behavior, doing things without really thinking things through, to living now more thoughtfully. We're turning away from imposing our expectations on how life is supposed to be and expecting life to conform to these expectations. And we're moving towards unhooking these expectations so that we can start to have more of an alignment with reality as it is. We're turning away from blame towards an accepting that it is what it is. Let's get busy with dealing with it. Instead of figuring out whose fault it is, what can we do about it? We're moving away from imposing unenforceable rules on ourselves and others, and moving towards trying to develop a philosophy of live and let live, a philosophy that creates room for all, that's inclusive, not exclusive. The unenforceable rules were incredibly exclusive. You were only okay if you did what I thought you should do. We're moving away from a life that is focused on having and defining ourselves based on what we have. I am more the more I have. A consciousness that is so grounded in materialism. To now we're moving towards being, and now developing a spiritual consciousness. We're moving away from control and feeling like we need to control everything for us to be okay, to now moving towards experimenting with surrendering, learning to flow with the situation. We're moving away from rigidity and moving towards flexibility, learning how to roll with the punches. We're moving away from making claims and demands on ourselves and others, and looking now instead of making requests, which means you have an option to do it or not to do it. I'd like it, but if you don't, that's fine. I'll be fine too. We're moving away from deflecting, from avoiding taking any responsibility, and we're moving towards embracing the responsibility for ourselves, our behavior and actions. We're moving towards a full engagement with life and a presence in life that is so different than before. We're moving away from our emotional dependency, our need for environmental support, towards self-support, differentiation, maturity. We're moving away from being right, and we're moving towards connection. We're moving away from manipulating people to do what we want them to do, and we're moving towards operating with integrity. We're moving away from compliance, from submission, towards cooperation with integrity. We're moving away from fusion and demanding that the other person does what we want them to do, thinks the way we want them to think, towards a respect for the differences of people, to honor separateness and seeing it as a dimension of our connectedness. We're moving away from acting for ourselves by stepping on the toes of others, by impinging on the rights of others, towards learning to act for ourselves without stepping on the toes of others and impinging on the rights of other people. We're moving away from imprisonment, an emotional prison that we built for ourselves, to a true spirit of independence and freedom. That's what the turning is involved here. And we have no idea when we're at step 3, all that's involved. But each and every one of these turnings starts to put our life on a different foundation. It's now starting to create a very different kind of consciousness in our life. We're moving away from the consciousness that says, I'm okay if, to a consciousness that says, I'm okay even if. Well, that's all for me tonight. Let me invite Roger and Tom and Herb in, and let's see what they'd like to share about the beginnings of this step 3.
Well, God bless your wonderful friend.
Thanks, Tom.
I'm sorry for yours and his family's loss. And man, obviously that man's got a hell of a ripple effect.
Yes.
They will continue to go on. You're a part of that ripple effect. Now this group is part of that ripple effect.
Right.
You know, it goes on and on and on. It's beautiful. And what they wrote was beautiful. So thanks for sharing it.
You're welcome. I thought it really captured the spirit of recovery, didn't it?
It did. I was sitting there thinking, we can go ahead and say the Trinity prayer in the meeting right now, man. It's like that's beautiful. Yeah, it's like I didn't want to do. I didn't even. I thought, what else we got to say? It's just beautiful. And I had not heard you talk about. I've heard you mention him, but I'd never heard you talk as much about the second Tom. I knew there were 2 Toms, but I look forward maybe to hearing some more stories as we go forward.
I'm blessed by having a lot of wonderful Toms in my life.
You do. You got your life is Tomful.
Oh, that is Tomful. That's very well said.
That's what I got to say. Anybody else?
Well, Herb, yeah, I'd love to hear what you have to say, Herb.
I'd love to talk here. Although, Tom, you're so right. Almost amen, and thank you, and we'll see you next week. But what I got as you were reading what they wrote was a picture, and clearly the picture speaks more loudly than 1,000 words, but the words created the picture. So thank you for sharing that with us, with the personal tone and touch that you brought to it, as you allowed it to unreal for us. So much to unpack here. I mean, quite frankly, I could echo what Tom just said about the letter, about what your reflections are about the topic, because, I mean, I hope you write an article that uses that as a structure for it, because that was very powerful. And I'm just going to say just a couple things. The turning, as you know, Alan, I've given a lot of thought to that. It is from the darkness to the light in sort of a poetic image that we can really get. But as you captured it in the book, the 12-step method and process is literally the turning from self-centeredness, and there's a huge description of that there to give us what that means in the negative delusional sense, to other-centeredness. And the word pun is intended. From self to other is the turning, and it's a turning that turns from my self-centeredness to other-centeredness, but first making a decision that there is an other with a capital O. It's anonymous, but it's that power, that infinity that is impossible for us with our finitude to capture. But that's only half the story, because the turning is other-centeredness in terms of others as the humanity. You use the term the organismic life force. Well, this is the plasma of my plasma. This is the life force of my life force. And like an organism, there's a diversity of cells but the cells all are in relationship to one another. And you talked and concluded by talking about independence. I do want to, and you included it in reference, but I want to make it really clear. It's the independence and the interdependence balance that Melody Beattie talks about in terms of the resolution to and the solution to codependency. I read a phrase, and I'm going to stop with that, the other day that just captured, I'm still unpacking it. The proper use of my free will is the willingness to be willing. I mean, that's a package. The willingness to be willing. It's so approximate. I deal with just a large percentage of perfectionists, which creates all their problems. And that's such a gift, the willingness to be willing.
Yeah.
But you made the major point. And the action that goes with the witness to the willingness. Because without the willingness, and the man who took me through the steps said this, and I got it, and it was an accusation more than it was poetry. He said, willingness without action is fantasy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the hard, you talk about reality. That's the reality. Reality is what it is. That's the humility. Reality has this positive dynamic in it. That's the hope. And I'm going to do the damnedest I can to connect with the truth of all of that. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Herb. Wow. And Tom and Al, I too want to chime in, I guess, and thank you for reading that. And obviously, I didn't know that, Tom. Fortunately, I've had a couple of opportunities in my life to meet your other Tom, your sponsor, Tom. But I tell you what I was most struck by, Al, is how you sounded and how you felt as you were giving tribute to this man who's been so important in your life. What it brought up for me and brought home for me is that someone like him, someone who's willing to live a life that is centered in taking good care of himself and with the capital letters, right? And giving so much to others. And so what I was touched by mostly is someone like that, if we can be open to them, can touch us at such a deep level that we are able to experience a kind of grace. We are able to experience a kind of grace, kind of through them. I won't say a reflection of them, that's not quite right, but through letting in what he's given you, you are changed. And when you're reading what you read, it just makes it very real to me. It's like, yeah, this man had so much influence on me and he changed me. I'm a more loving, more empathic, more tender, better version of myself, right? When I'm connected to the importance of this person in my life. And it's inspiring. It's inspiring to hear you read it. And I can tell you've been immensely inspired by him. So there's a lot of levels to say thank you for reading that. And I'm sorry for your loss. Yeah.
You know, I was talking to my sponsor, Tom, last week because he visited Tom and because he knew that his end was near. And he was sharing with me that, you know, what it was like to sit with him and to be with him during those times. And, you know, we ended the call on, I think it was on Sunday. And so I went to sleep that night and I had this dream. There was a knock on my door from Osa Beach. Remember the office that I worked out of? And outside the door was Tom. And he was standing there with the other Tom.
Mhm.
He came to say goodbye to me.
Wow.
That was on Sunday night.
Yeah.
It was so powerful, man. I called Tom. I said, I think he's going to die this week.
Yeah.
I told him what happened in the dream. And we just cried about it tonight together. So powerful. And Tom was just standing there in the state he was in now, so just worn out and beat up by the dementia. I mean, it just really was terrible. He was hallucinating, and there were people in his house all the time that weren't there. And he got to the point where he says, I don't think they're real, but they seem so real to me, I mean, it was such a torture for him there at the end.
Wow. Wow. Thank you. Yeah.
It's heartbreaking and it's beautiful.
Yeah. And that you had your sponsor Tom, to turn to. Mm-hmm. Not just to have those feelings in yourself and go through them by yourself, but that you had Tom to call
tonight, because Tom was Tom's sponsor. Tom.
Oh, really? You had told me that once. I'd forgotten that. Wow.
And so I reached out to Tom to see how he was doing tonight with this whole thing.
Sure.
Absolutely. Well, it's what they say. You can never have too many Toms.
I'm Tomful. I love that. All right, Tom. We'll bring the other Tom. Another Tom.
Another Tom.
They're all over the place.
You got backups to your backups.
I got backups.
That's right.
Well, yeah. Thank you for sharing this all. Somehow feel very blessed to be part of this. And I want to say that when we talk about turning towards, this is a supreme example of I would not be in this position to be empathetic and feel this and be a part of this if I hadn't made that decision at some point to turn towards recovery and emotional sobriety and emotional engagement with other people. Wow. Very moving.
I hear a lot of people criticize the 12 steps, that they're old-fashioned. I can understand that criticism. They were written back in 1935. Some people that are agnostic have difficulty with the word God used in the steps. For me, I look at the process that's involved. The forces that the 12 steps generate are so powerful that I think they're ageless. There's this interesting phenomena that happens when you work the steps. They create a charge and then a discharge. The first step, we're powerless. Our life has become unmanageable. It creates this charge. We're in big trouble and we don't know what to do. And then step 2 comes along and it says we have hope. That charge, that existential crisis that we have is resolved. What's happening here is parallel to life. We charge ourselves when we breathe in. When we exhale, we discharge. That's the rhythm of life. And the way I love to think about the 12 steps, it's helping us get connected to the rhythm of life so we can learn how to show up in a good way.